The church called them brides of Christ, women who gave up the world outside, who swore to live in silence, purity, and obedience. But when one of them broke her vow, the punishment was not mercy. It was designed to crush her body and her soul. The story of what happened to nuns who cross a line is darker than most people imagine. Behind the stone walls of convents, where prayers should fill the air, another truth waited, punishment so cruel they turned the cloister into a place of fear. Tonight, we step into that hidden world, a place where vows became chains and mistakes turned into lifelong scars. The cloister walls. Medieval Europe held a strict image of the nun. She was meant to be pure, untouched by desire, locked away from the temptations of the world. Once a woman entered the convent, she was expected never to leave. The heavy gates closed behind her like a tomb. But these walls did not always protect. They were prisons for women who slipped. A single kiss, a hidden meeting, a touch under candlelight. These were enough to bring down punishment that would last until death. The church believed that a nun who broke her vow betrayed not just herself, but God, and betrayal of God demanded public shame. The forbidden touch. The vow of chastity was the heaviest burden. Desire was not just sin, it was treason. Stories spread of nuns who secretly met men, sometimes priests, sometimes guards, sometimes even strangers who scaled the convent walls in the night. When caught, the punishment was not simple. For some, their heads were shaved in front of their sisters, a symbol of disgrace. For others, the shame went deeper. They were stripped of their holy robes and forced to wear rags, paraded before the community as an example. The church taught that a woman who let her body fall into sin should feel the same humiliation in her punishment, buried alive in stone. In some convents, the punishment went far beyond shaming. A nun who broke her vows could be sentenced to live entombed inside the very convent she once called home. Historical records describe small chambers built into the walls. A woman would be sealed inside with a tiny slit to pass food and water. She could pray, she could cry, but she would never leave. Her life became a living grave. This was not quick execution. It was slow suffocation of the soul. Day after day, year after year, she remained trapped. Her only company was the sound of prayers outside, prayers she could no longer join. The whip of silence. Physical punishment was common in convents, but it carried special weight for those who broke their vows. Whipping was a way to strip the body of its pride. A nun caught in forbidden acts could be tied before her sisters and beaten until her back was raw. But worse than the pain was the silence. None of the others were allowed to cry for her. They had to watch in silence as the punishment fell, knowing that speaking out could put them in the same place. This silence was part of the cruelty. It left the punished woman utterly alone. The chains of obedience. Some convents kept iron chains for those who disobeyed. A nun who broke her vow might be forced to wear them for months, even years. Shackles at her wrists and ankles, hidden under her robes, digging into her skin as she prayed. The chains were heavy, but that was the point. Every step reminded her of her shame. Every prayer was weighed down by iron. Some were even chained in their cells, allowed out only for Mass, a ghost among the sisters who once sat beside them. The scarlet letter of the cloister. Shame did not always stay inside the convent. In some cases, the punishment was meant for the world outside to see. A nun who was caught breaking her vow could be paraded to the town in rags, sometimes with painted marks on her skin or cloth sewn into her robe to show her sin. Villagers would spit, children would laugh, and the message was clear. This was what happened to women who betrayed God. For many, this was worse than pain. To live with humiliation carved into your identity was a wound that never healed. The hidden children. Some vows did not break in secret. When a nun bore a child, the scandal could not be hidden. The church often viewed the newborn as proof of corruption. Some convents forced a nun to leave the child at the church steps, abandoned to its fate. Others recorded darker whispers, that the child was taken and silenced, erased from memory, so that no stain would remain on the holy order. For the mother, the punishment was a wound beyond words. She lost not only her vows, but her child, her name, and her place in the world. The cold cell, at the edge of many convents, were cells reserved for punishment, dark, damp, and small enough that a woman could not stand upright. Some were kept there for weeks, others for years. Bread and water slid through a hole in the wall. No warmth, no comfort, only time to remember the sin that brought her there. The church called it penance, but for many women it was slow destruction. Their minds broke before their bodies did. The spectacle of death. For some nuns, the punishment did not stop at humiliation or chains. There are records, rare but chilling, of women put to death for their broken vows. Execution was not always public, but when it was, the church made certain it left a mark. Some were buried alive, a cruel echo of their vows of silence. Others were burned, their deaths treated as both cleansing fire and warning flame. The sight of a nun at the stake sent a message to every convent in Europe. Vows were sacred, and to break them was to die in disgrace. The body could also be marked forever. A nun who broke her vows might be branded with hot iron, a permanent scar pressed into her flesh. Sometimes it was on the hand, sometimes on the forehead. The scar was not just punishment, it was identity. For the rest of her life, wherever she went, her shame followed her. She was a living warning, a woman whose skin carried the church's judgment. And there was no escape. Even if she left the convent, even if she vanished into the crowd, her body told the world what she had been. The last confession. Death came slowly for many punished nuns, and the church demanded they confess before the end. Some were forced to kneel for hours on stone floors, repeating prayers until their voices broke. Others were made to fast, their bodies wasting away while their souls were said to be cleansed. But for many, confession was not release. It was one final act of control. The nun would beg forgiveness for her sin, knowing that even if her soul was saved, her body had already been destroyed. The prison of memory. Even after death, the punishment could continue. Records show that some convents erased the names of women who broke their vows. Their graves were left unmarked, their lives scrubbed from the order's history. In a time when memory was survival, this was a second death. Forgotten by their sisters, denied the prayers of the living, they faded into silence. The church believed this erased shame. But what it truly did was bury human suffering under layers of stone and silence. A warning to the living. All of these punishments, chains, fire, silence, and shame, were not only for the women who suffered them. They were lessons for every other nun behind the cloister walls. The message was clear. Your body does not belong to you. Your life is no longer yours. Any step away from obedience will end in pain. The convents that carried out these punishments believed they were defending purity, but what they created was a world of fear. Whispers that survived. The church tried to bury these stories, but not all of them disappeared. Chronicles, letters, and whispers kept the truth alive. Behind the hymns and prayers, there was another voice, quiet, almost lost, that told of women who suffer for breaking their vows. Their stories remind us that history is not only about kings and battles. It is about women locked away, punished for being human. The final silence. In the end, the greatest punishment was silence itself. The silence of chains rattling in hidden cells. The silence of children erased from memory. The silence of names wiped from records. These women gave their lives to God, but when they faltered, the church made certain their voices were never heard again. And that is the wound that lingers, not just what happened to them, but how quickly they were forgotten. What happened to nuns who broke their vows was more than punishment. It was a warning, written in chains and fire, meant to shape obedience through fear. The convents promised salvation, but for many women, those stone walls became their prison, and their vows became the tools of their destruction. Their stories remain buried in shadows, waiting for us to remember.